Britannia is a program which Simon Rivard put together, which is paying homage to the great and rich musical tradition of the United Kingdom. The name Britannia comes from a piece by the composer James Macmillan. This is a concert overture in which there are excerpts of pieces by Elgar, but also a good deal of folk music. But there are other very interesting pieces in the program, a composition by Hannah Kendall, also Gustav Holst, and of course James Macmillan. But in a way, the main course of the program is Elgar's Enigma Variations, which is an iconic, beautiful, great piece, which is for every young musician and for every youth orchestra really fun to play. They get to explore not only about the technical aspects of the instrument or the section, but allows you to explore different moods and dynamics, colors. So I think altogether it's really a beautiful program which forms this Britannia. Having this opportunity of playing Elgar Enigma Variations for the first time for many of those young musicians is a wonderful opportunity. Trevor Wilson and Simon Rivard. The great thing about working with them, I mean, there are many aspects I enjoy, but they are in a different way than musicians. They are colleagues. I have worked with Simon Rivard for a couple of years. Now I have worked already for a complete year with Trevor Wilson. And, you know, I see them daily, right before a rehearsal, in the intermission, after the rehearsals, before the concerts, after the concerts. We catch up, we comment things of the concert, how things are going, we comment things of the scores, what needs to be done, what they have perceived from the audience, because actually they are, in a way, also my ears. Not, of course, I have a perception being on stage, but for me to get someone you trust listening in the audience is great. So having people like Trevor Wilson or Simon Rivard has been great these years, and always just the fact of commenting, interacting, having the feeling of having a colleague, someone you trust and you can speak with. Our collaboration goes in different directions. One is what we do with the TSO, but also with the TSYO. And they have been the leaders of the project. They make the programs, what even there we interact about, which is the contents. Having them so close to me in all senses has been a very enjoyable project in the last couple of years.
Well, there's several things I'm looking forward to in conducting this program with the TSYO. This is a chance for me to get familiar with two new pieces that I wasn't familiar with before. Both the Kendall and Holst are new to me, as I'm sure is the case for the orchestra as well. The Holst, for example, actually was what the composer considered his best work, which is interesting considering the popularity of the planets and how relatively unknown a lot of his other compositions are. But the Holst is a wonderful piece. The title is also a landscape. So Egdon Heath is based on a fictional place in England, which is the setting of stories by Thomas Hardy, the author. And it evokes the feelings of that landscape and the characters associated with it. For example, this piece starts very softly with only half the double bass section playing with mutes as it slowly descends. And we see the mist all around this almost barren landscape. There's shrubbery, there's forests, it's dark. The area was associated with witchcraft and paganism. So there's something mysterious and magical in the air. It builds later to a climax, sort of evocative of perhaps ancient battles that took place there. Yeah, very evocative. Much of it is very noble in character. We have the brass playing this sort of noble march in 5. So that's sort of an awkward time signature of 5. We don't hear a lot of pieces in 5. Of course, the first movement of the planets, the Mars Bringer of War, was in 5. But yeah, there's something slightly off kilter about this march, but it still retains that very noble, solemn quality to it. So the Sparkcatchers is a very different sort of piece. It was written based on poems by the poet Lem Sissay. It's in 3 major sections. And throughout the piece, we have music that is inspired by quotes from the poem, which are actually written in the score. So in the one of the first parts of the piece, it says molten madness. And so we have the orchestra evoking this sort of volcanic quality. Then the middle section is very dreamlike, and it's inspired by the line beneath the stars. And so we're in a dream for a minute or two before we return to the same sort of atmosphere of the beginning, very fiery. And like a flame, the piece ends in sort of a sputter as the orchestra sort of sputters out, and then a final spark, and it's over. So the second half of the program, which Simon Rivard is conducting, features James Macmillan's Britannia, and also Edward Elgar's The Enigma Variations. Both of these pieces have a lot to do with community. And the way in which that's the case for Macmillan is that actually it's a celebration of British cultural life, specifically of British orchestras. The Enigma Variations. It begins with a dark, melancholic theme, which Elgar said represented the loneliness of the artist, and really it's about the loneliness of Elgar himself in a world that he felt wasn't recognizing his talent. And one by one, we are introduced to each of his friends, and also his wife, and eventually we're surrounded by this community of people who are supporting him, and once that happens, we are launched into the final variation, Elgar's own variation, which is now transformed into this triumphant major, which reels to an exciting close, complete with organ, and all the stops are out.
The good thing about this cast, which is formed by Isabel Leonard, Paul Appleby, and Derek Welton, is this is quite a surprising thing to encounter in the sense of this was actually my first choice. I'm so grateful, so happy that the three of them were available, but not only for what they are or what they can do individually. They are great artists, great singers. I have been following them in the last years. They have broad repertoire. I never worked with them before, so you could say this is kind of a gamble, but it's also a very exciting opportunity for me to get to know the three of them. But this is not only for what they are individually, but this is the team I had imagined, the three of them together. So I'm so happy, so grateful, and so fortunate I feel that they are available and willing to do this project, and which is going to be very exciting for all of us. For many reasons, but Pulcinella, it's a well-known piece, but mainly the suite. And to do the complete ballet with these great three singers is something we are all very much looking forward to. The fact that we did the recording of Messiaen's Turangalila last season was a very good experience, which allowed me to realize how such a project, such a week goes in Toronto with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. And what I notice when we do a recording is that the preparation, the focus, if every single concert we try to have to make an event out of it and to perform at the highest level, you just feel in the first rehearsal of such a project that everyone is so prepared, so motivated, so focused. And that energy, I perceive that from my position, coming from the musicians, and I was very, very impressed. You feel that already in a first rehearsal. You feel it in the series of rehearsals we are doing and the general rehearsal. But what I remember very well is also speaking to the audience right before the concerts, making them aware that their silence, hopefully, great silence is, and their attention and their attentive listening is being part of the energy, which is going to give us even greater motivation. But just the fact that that at that moment, what's happening there, it's what's going to result in a recording, in a CD. So the level of attention, concentration is quite extraordinary. I was very impressed last year, and that's what we are as musicians. You need that tension. You need that tension in order to deliver the best you can. And sometimes you even, when there is also a collective on a stage, the energy which is produced excels what you had imagined. So it gives you a good degree of responsibility and tension, but I do know it's also because of thanks to that we are going to give great concerts and I think also a great recording. You know, Pulcinella is somehow considered the very beginning of the so-called neoclassical period of Stravinsky, in which he looks back at not only classical period, but he looks back at the past also, at Baroque era. And in Pulcinella, he took themes at the time believed they came all from composer Pergolesi, but we know now that it's not only Pergolesi, but also Monza, Domenico Galli, Van Wassenaar. So it's very interesting how he takes those themes and he creates with a modern language with an apparent simplicity. That's why, even though not per se has to be classical related, but there is a way of looking at the past and bringing it to our times with a language which is modern, with an apparent simplicity as it was done in the classical period. Fairy's Kiss, the Divertimento of the Fairy's Kiss, is also part. It was composed if Pulcinella 1920, Fairy's Kiss 1927-28 belongs to that same period, in which he's not looking back at the classical period or Baroque, but he takes the inspiration of this short tale by Hans Christian Andersen, but the music from Tchaikovsky, and he's paying homage to Tchaikovsky. So he's again taking a source, taking a theme, and translating it in something which applies to us now in a modern language, but also clearly recognizable Stravinsky. So it's something miraculous in a way. How can you have all those themes from other composers and to create a frame and which is clearly your own language, but also a language which contrasts from the previous period of compositions by Stravinsky, like you have the Sacre du Printemps and the L'Oiseau de Feu, and that so-called Russian period. So it's really interesting what Stravinsky did during that phase of his life, this neoclassical period, and therefore having these two ballets, the Divertimento of Fairy's Kiss and Pulcinella, it's also, I think, a nice journey and a very, very good opportunity for us and for the audience to witness how that period was. Kelly Murray Murphy's piece was commissioned by the Toronto Symphony Orchestra with Peter Owenjan, my predecessor, conducting it. And I read about the piece, and it's quite interesting, of course, because in the end it has to do. You hear Petula Clark, and you might think the piece has something to do with it, but only partially, because actually relates to also Glenn Gould's and relates to a radio program Glenn Gould was hosting for a period. And Kelly Marie talks about this radio program, about how impressed she was with the determination and fascination in which Glenn Gould, approached those radio programs, no matter what was the content, with the same seriousness than he would approach recording Bach. And she was very impressed. So I'm not completely sure the notes or the playing is really affected by the whole story, but definitely it's always nice to know what has been the source, what has been the initial starting point of a thought, of an idea, of what has been a motivation in order for a composer to bring something alive. And obviously, I think Stravinsky unavoidably has influenced most of composers in the 20th century and 21st century. And everyone, all living composers nowadays, relate and talk about Stravinsky like, like that great source of inspiration, definitely for everything what happened in the 20th century. So that's why having Kelly Marie Murphy's music in this program alongside Stravinsky makes sense to us also for the recording. Being Spanish, I've been for being Spanish, but I lived abroad for many years outside Spain and work in so many different places in the world. And I have always avoided consciously, also in many occasions, I have avoided doing Spanish repertoire because somehow, it's maybe can come across as quite cliche or what expected. And I was interested about doing different repertoire than the one I know since I was a child and I've been listening to. But I remember very well once being in the Roy Thompson Hall. I did some Spanish music in the past here in Toronto, but I remember being at the hall listening to a concert and someone in the audience said, "You have to bring more Spanish music. We love it." And then every time I talk to people, yeah, Spanish music, when are you going to bring some more Spanish music? It happens. And I realized, wait a second, while I've been maybe trying to, not to give my back, but walk away and go in different directions than doing Spanish music, actually, there is some Spanish music which is absolutely wonderful, which I really feel, which is dear to me and I feel close to my heart. But not only that, people here do appreciate. They are looking forward to listen to Spanish music. So that's why that gave me great motivation in order to, okay, let's do great, good Spanish music. But not only the music people do know, like the TSYO is a wonderful composer. And indeed, we are doing Le Tricorn, Sombrero de Tres Picos. It's the Sombrero de Tres Picos is the title in Spanish, the two suites, which is great music and which people know. But Francisco Coy is a great friend of mine and a great composer, and the Toronto Symphony Orchestra already knows his music. But as Stravinsky did, looking back at the, at thematic content in order to make it his own. So taking inspiration from something from a different composer to create something new. So that's what Francisco Coy has done, to take Spanish or clearly Spanish motifs and has made a piece which is modern, which is like bringing like reality distorted. So it sounds clearly Spanish, but also it's like it's very modern, it's very daring, and it's like a puzzle of different elements and a little bit even disruptive, which makes it very exciting and very interesting because you are realizing, this sounds familiar, this feels familiar, this is clearly Spanish music, but there is something. How is that possible? But it's just different. It just feels different. The pace is different and is pushing the limits and trying to get out of a very clear and recognizable frame. So yes, I love doing Spanish music. I love doing this in Toronto, and I'm very aware of the fact that's appreciated not only by the Spanish or Latin community who lives in Toronto, but by everyone. People just love Spanish music. But it's great not to bring only the recognizable and popular tunes or compositions, but also the most interesting voices by living composers, like in this case, and also bring new compositions alive, which is also what we do regularly and which we have been doing so often also with young Canadian composers. So this is part of it. I think something which keeps the orchestra, the audience, and myself excited, motivated, and it makes me feel also at home in a different way by doing Spanish music. Javier Perillanes is a good friend of mine. We worked in many different places, also in Toronto a couple of seasons ago, but also in Los Angeles, in Valencia, in Indianapolis, I remember. Also San Francisco. He's a dear friend of mine. We speak often. We are very aware of what we do in daily life, and this has been an interesting collaboration. This triangle composer, Francisco Coy, Javier, and myself, because I've done so much music by Francisco in the past. I know the music so well. Javier was very interested himself in playing new music, and that was like an obvious choice, and to do something which is, you have this piece by Manuel de Falla, Nights in the Gardens of Spain. I wouldn't say this is exactly the same, but there is something there, there is a source of inspiration there for us to do something which is Spanish, which sounds Spanish, but Spanish belonging to our times. So it's great to have, when friendship and close relationships from a human point of view, and musical relationships, when everything comes together, it makes your life and the process very, very enjoyable.